Person who has signed up is Fred Salvucci.
Very much, Madam Chairman. As I mentioned the other day, it's rare that I admit being wrong. Let me do it on the record. I disagreed with Secretary Pollack a couple of years ago, arguing that some key decisions should be made then, specifically to drop the viaduct option. And I admitted to her the other day I was wrong, that by including 3 options in the draft EIR, there's now an incredible technical record and public comment that I think should simplify getting a final environmental impact report done in an expeditious way, but that some policy decisions have to be made now. The history of this thing, a little piece of it was in today's Globe around the aesthetics, but what's not in today's Globe is that when the turnpike was built, 4 rail stations were eliminated, 3 in Brighton and Alston and 1 at Newton Corner, and the railway was confined to a single track, ruining commuter rail service to the west for approximately 45 to 50 years. The second track has now been restored, which is a big improvement to the west. We've gotten the New Balance station, which is an improvement, but West Station is absolutely critical to relieving the growing congestion on the turnpike, which is causing all the spillover traffic in Brighton Center. It's not intuitively obvious that the traffic jam in Brighton Center is caused by decisions made 50 years ago to eliminate the rail, but that's what's going on. The best chance to fix that is the combination of West Station and a 2-track Grand Junction service over to Kendall. So 2 issues. One, I think there are a couple of poison pills in the current draft that should be fixed on a policy level. One is I don't believe the viaduct is compatible with the 2 tracks. I believe that the 2 at-grades are. I think that's a key factor. And I believe that the prioritization of layup as an early action caused the postponement of West Station till 2040 in the draft EIR, which is totally unacceptable to everybody. And I think that the 2-year restoration of a single track constraint, which will mess up everyone from Alston Landing to Worcester, is a disaster associated with the viaduct plan. So I think a key policy decision to say, we've looked at it long enough, let's focus on the at-grade, let's get West Station early, and let's get the layup as the last phase rather than the first phase so that we can organize the construction in an orderly way. One thing they did right 50 years ago is they had no holes in the ground at Prudential, which is why that's been an engine of growth for our economy. The flip gives the chance to have the Cambridge Street bypass set it up so that the air rights can be developed in an orderly way here, and we're not going to be looking at holes in the ground forever, right next to a West Station that we're hoping is going to be the center of the kind of economic vitality that we've seen at Prudential. So I appreciate you've let me go a little over my time, and thank you very much. Obviously happy to answer questions, but I know you don't normally ask them.
Thank you. Appreciate it. The next is Rick Dimino from A Better City, and I have.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, Chairman Aiello, and members of the board. It's a pleasure to be here today. My name is Rick Dimino. I'm the President and CEO of A Better City. We represent a business-based organization that its members represent the economic drivers of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and very much interested in the opportunity to speak on the subject matter of West Station today and its relationship to the I-90 project. West Station and the I-90 project are regional projects. They go far beyond Boston and Cambridge in terms of the implications. They relate to an interstate system. It relates to the relationship to an economic center that is driving the economy here in Boston and the region and outpacing many economic centers in the entire Northeast. Our interest in West Station and the related transit elements relate to the notion that we need to create transit capacity that can serve the future economic interests of both Boston, Cambridge, the urban core, and the rest of the Commonwealth. We believe it's a critical element. We look forward to the interrelationship and collaboration between the transit elements and the I-90 elements. West Station and I-90 are truly representing a multimodal project and offers great opportunity to provide improved rail and bus access to a new rail station, West Station. Early action on Grand Junction we think is critically important, along with opportunities related to the multimodal aspects to enhance public realm, pedestrian, and bicycle access to and along the Charles River. In that regard, we believe the at-grade alternative best supports the near and long-term transit system elements related to this project and the region. The transit services that a new West Station enable will support not only 7 million square feet of the new development projected in the region, but the entire growth zone as we defined in our transportation dividend report of a better city. We ask that you not only support a permanent West Station related to this new development in Major Neck, but also improve an interim West Station. We think an interim West Station can help mitigate the construction impacts of the related project in the early stages of the project, and we're actually looking for a center platform of that interim project, and we're actually looking for the maintenance of 2 commuter rail lines, not just one. We highly recommend that those 2 lines be kept in place. We ask that the Fiscal Control Board take action immediately in relationship to the MBTA so that the next 60 to 90 days, the Control Board will have a better understanding about the interim and permanent transit elements. You remember we were here earlier when we seriously questioned the transit forecasts associated with this relationship that were identified in the draft EIR. So we think the Control Board should be looking at constructability, transit demand, and the overall transportation needs of this, as well as the air right opportunities. So Control Board, please take action on behalf of the T. So make sure that the final EIR has your perspective associated with making sure that West Station is created an opportunity for a permanent opportunity, as well as making sure the interim actions are taken and the air rights developments are fully considered. So thank you for my time. The next person on my staff that will be speaking is Kathryn Carlson. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. I'm going to follow up on Rick's points. My colleague Tom Nally and I are going to make a few specific suggestions on what we suggest be included in the final EIR and in further developing the preferred option. Number one, as Rick mentioned, an early action interim West Station with crosstown bus service and full 2-track operations serving a center platform. I know those all very specific things that we think are important on the Worcester-Framingham commuter rail line should be required to mitigate construction during that period. 2, a permanent full-build regional West Station with crosstown bus service must be included and built between 2025 and 2040. The sooner the better, of course. There are several other rail issues that need to be addressed in this. According to the draft environmental impact report, construction of the Viaduct 3 option would require the Worcester rail line to be reduced from 2 tracks to 1 track for an extended period of time, while the turnpike is reduced to a total of 3 travel lanes in each direction. In order to mitigate the impact of the turnpike reductions, 2 tracks, we strongly suggest that 2 tracks should be maintained during peak hours throughout the construction period. And finally, for my points, there should be greater clarity on whether or not the Viaduct 3 option can accommodate 2-track Grand Junction service. This is following up on what Mr. Salvucci said as well. The board should require providing 2-track service on the Grand Junction line to provide for all future service opportunities. Thank you. I'm going to cede the rest of my time to my colleague, Tom Nally.
Thank you, Kathryn, and thank you all for giving us the opportunity to present some of our ideas. We think there should be further analysis and support for replacement of the Grand Junction rail bridge over Soldiers Field Road, the Little Grand Junction Bridge. That will not only replace an aging bridge structure, but will also provide for a wider Paul Dudley White path in the eastern end of the project area. In terms of constructability, there's a clear understanding of how the all-at-grade alternative can be more reliably constructed and provide less disruption to transit during that period. Mitigation of the Little Grand Junction Bridge construction over Soldier Field Road is viable, especially with the level of service that's carried on that bridge today. There are other routes that can get service to where they need to go. Further analysis in support of the flip of the Worcester Branch tracks and the rail yard should be completed to evaluate its merits and perhaps find a better location for West Station. The merits of extending the esplanade and with ample paths and providing an expanded soft edge to improve river habitats, as illustrated by the Sasaki and the NBBJ drawing that have been presented recently in the DAR. These concepts should receive further consideration, analysis, and support. One of the unique aspects of the all-at-grade option is associated with permitting, and it has to do with providing direct access to the edge of the Charles River. It's a unique aspect that's not possible. And finally, we recognize that every option has permitting challenges. We look forward to working with MassDOT to sort through these challenges and addressing them. Thank you.
Notice that Councilor Wu had signed up, and we usually call elected officials early, so if you'd like to come up next, we'd be delighted to have you.
Good afternoon, Madam Secretary, Chairman Aiello, members of both boards. Thank you for having all of us. I'm going to do the opposite and know that all of the experts testifying after me are going to make great points, so I would like to just emphasize in advance everything that they will say, but particularly from the city's perspective to say that this is a tremendous, tremendous opportunity that we would like, that I, in my capacity as the council's chairperson of our Planning, Development, and Transportation Committee, would very much like to emphasize the same points of increasing the capacity as much as possible, as early as possible with this opportunity. As you know, commuter rail has been a particularly near and dear fight for us on the council in terms of getting the fare zones restructured and making sure that all of Boston has access to affordable fares, but getting the infrastructure right as soon as possible is also key to that. So we want to see multimodal options. We want to see all of the visions that have been put forth by A Better City, Livable Streets, the Charles River Conservancy, and many of the advocates that are united behind this vision. Thank you so much for your diligence.
Thank you, Councilor. Okay, Sloan from WalkBoston.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, Chairman Aiello, members of both boards. Delighted to speak. I really want to bring up one thing I think is really important. West Station is extremely important as part of this overall project, but it's an enormous, huge, expensive, very complicated project, and we must not concern ourselves only with West Station. For instance, I have read all of the 560 letters sent into MEPA as comments on the MassDOT DEIR for the project. Over half of the commenters asked that MassDOT reconsider its position on delaying West Station to after 2040. But the second largest group, nearly a third, asked for detailed study of the throat area and for careful consideration of the Charles River Conservancy WalkBoston plan as presented by Sasaki to improve the riverfront. We ask you and have sent a letter to you and handed it out today. You all should have a copy of it, that you, in order to put the project back on track, that you reject the viaduct option and ask the consultant staff and the MassDOT staff working with them to reject it and to approve the two at-grade options because they are cheaper and they do the job better. And the other thing we think that really needs to be done is to let the task force that you appointed to deal with the project get back to work. We haven't had a meeting for many months, and we're really anxious to hear what's going on and would like to participate. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Renata von Tscharner.
Madam Secretary, President, my name is Renata von Tscharner. I'm the founder and president of the Charles River Conservancy. This 18-year-old organization is concerned about the Charles River, the parklands, and you're building an important transportation facility. But the West Station is crucial because that means it's going to be multimodal, therefore it needs to come early. because parklands are not just a place to accommodate cars. We have learned that through history, that the impact of cars on the parklands on the Charles River are enormous. So now we have a chance to make it differently, to do it better. So the parklands are going to be an important part of this new project. And obviously, the more we have multimodal transportation, also bicyclists and walking, the better this urban development is, because this is not just a transportation project. This is an urban design project on the banks of the Charles, in the heart of Boston and Cambridge. So that's why West Station is so important, and of course all the connections for bicyclists, they are just as important as cars, because we know we can't accommodate more cars, but we can accommodate people coming by train and by bicycle. So I hope you'll reconsider that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Laura Jasinski.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, and the rest of the board. As the incoming Executive Director of the Charles River Conservancy, I just wanted to add to Renata's comments and support them. I'm particularly excited about this opportunity because I come from the Rose Kennedy Greenway Conservancy, and a great example of your own success doing a giant, not only highway project, but a city building project. That's really what the Greenway was, and that's really the opportunity that's here before us now. So I encourage you to work with the Charles River Conservancy, with WalkBoston, as set forth in the Sasaki plan, to realize the whole project in front of us and to take advantage of that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Harry Mattison.
Pollock and Chairman Aiello and members of the boards. I'd like to start by thanking Harvard University and Boston University for their growing support, both as abutters and financially, for the construction of West Station as soon as possible. We've come a long way in the past couple of years to the point where we have a very clear consensus now that West Station should be built as soon as possible, both as a commuter rail station, also as a multimodal station with a north-south busway connecting Column Ave and Brookline, Longwood, with Harvard's campus and Harvard Square and beyond. At the event hosted by the Charles River Conservancy in WalkBoston 2 weeks ago about unchoking the Charles River throat, there was also a presentation made by Harvard about reconfiguring the rail as it's been currently proposed. This flip, as it's known, has several benefits, one of which was that it would dramatically increase or improve the connection between West Station and the Charles River. I think it's essential that as we think about West Station, we think about it both connecting via bus through some new routes that become possible, and also by foot and by bicycle for people that might want to come to West Station and then continue on a hubway or whatever it's going to be called soon to continue their trip into the city, either Boston or Cambridge. So to do that, we have to think about West Station both in its design, operationally, but also, again, from a city building and urban design standpoint. And as Bob Sloan said, I certainly hope that we can start meeting again as a task force in a more two-way form of conversation than we have available at these meetings to further our work on these important questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve Kaiser.
Yes, I'm very happy to see that both boards are going to be discussing the West Station issue together. There's a big article in today's Globe dealing with the highway controversies of the I-190 project. So we have both traffic, both highway and transit controversies here that need to be discussed. I hope you get more than a West Station update when you deal with this. Have a very brief update and then really have a good discussion on these issues, because there's some very, very critical problems associated with the Alston area, particularly in transportation. The mention has been made of the draft EIR, and that was a document prepared by MassDOT Highway, 600 pages of large page, equivalent to 1,200 pages of regular size paper, an extraordinary document, the closest thing we have to a planning document. The next question is, where is the MBTA's contribution to this effort? It says multimodal on the front of the report. There's no MBTA material in there. There's no files. There's no reports. This is the best effort that can be made by MassDOT Highway to try to be multimodal, and yet they couldn't look at the rail connections to Kendall Square, for example. It wasn't in their contract. So what we have here is a failure to do good transit planning. Where's the master plan for transit for Alston? It's not there. The MBTA probably would say we can't do it because we don't have a planning department. Haven't had any since 1975. So we're in a real pickle here. And it's not just MassDOT, it's Harvard. Harvard's the one generating all the traffic in Alston. What's their plan say? 20% coming by transit, 60% by car. 60% by car. That's 1950s planning. So we are in a transit bind and a highway bind across the city. Boston Seaport is not much better. Alewife area in Cambridge is being badly planned. And if we don't watch it, Suffolk Downs may become badly planned too. So this whole issue of West Station becomes one of how do we do good transportation planning and talk about it. Thank you.
Okay. Stacy Thompson from Livable Streets.
I will preemptively, thank you, Secretary Pollack and the board. I will preemptively echo my colleagues who are going to talk about Longfellow later and say I support the Cyclist Union, but I am here today to talk about West Station. And I would also like to echo the comments of A Better City, WalkBoston, Councilor Wu, the Charles River Conservancy, and the People's Pike who went ahead of me. And I want to highlight the importance of implementing West Station as quickly as possible, specifically around the bus connectivity issues. And just remind folks here that the Walsh administration just committed to increasing the budget of their own transportation department by $5 million and adding an entire transit team, which means that the city, between their Go Boston 2030 plan and their own resources, are ready to meet you and work with you on better bus connectivity and commuter rail connectivity. And so we would love to see West Station come as soon as possible so that we can provide better service for the people who are trying to move between our communities in Cambridge and Boston. Those crosstown connections are critical in addition to the desperately needed commuter rail infrastructure. So I would like to say that, and then both in the context of this project and Longfellow, I would just like to have a better understanding of how MassDOT changes plans or postures in cities that have committed to Vision Zero, that have reduced their speed limit 25 miles an hour and have really prioritized walking and biking as critical modes for their future economic development. I think we're seeing a lot of confusion and questions about decisions and processes that were made 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and now a new reality that we have a heck of a lot of people who want to move via transit, walking, and biking, and how do we get there? So thank you for your time. I'm going to sneak out and have a good meeting.
I'm from Cambridge. I'm a member of the Livable Streets Alliance and Transit Matters. And I want to talk about West Station, the importance of building West Station right the first time. And I think we've talked a lot about that in the past. I sort of want to reiterate a few points. One is that we need to make sure that we build something that has a two-track connection to Kendall Square and North Station. This is a really important link, something that isn't well served by roadways and never will be because we stopped the Interbelt 45 or 50 years ago. So we have we have that opportunity now. We haven't seen any plan with the viaduct that shows the ability to build two tracks. Everything shows one track and some vague promise of it in the future, while the at-grade plans show two tracks, and that's really an integral part. Also, the linking across Soldiers Field Road, rebuilding that bridge is important to it as well. In addition, we need to make sure that West Station is an important part of the fabric in Alston, and by building something that's lower down on the ground, even as you get towards BU, something lower down on the ground will help us have lower grades and less impact to what we wind up building in Alston. That will hopefully be a real neighborhood that can be transit served, so that we don't have just more people on the turnpike, more traffic on the turnpike because they don't feel that they have a good way to get there. So as far as West Station goes, I think it's just really important to make sure that we have that, that it's built in that manner going forwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Madam Secretary, Mr. Chairman, members of both the MassDOT and the FMCB board. The presentation that I'm giving today is going to be at the request of Chairman Aiello, and a detailed report on the transportation and transit initiatives that are part of the Alston Modernization I-90 project itself. This is a multimodal project. There have been several presentations that have been given. The most recent presentations were last fall by Dave Moeller from MassDOT Planning. And then last December, Mike O'Dowd from MassDOT, who is our project manager for this project, also gave a presentation to the FMCB board. Also joining us this morning, or excuse me, this afternoon, is Jody Ray from Commuter Rail. Together, the three of them really can get into a lot more of the granular discussion on this particular project, as they've all been involved in various forms leading up to this particular point. As I discussed today, I'll be giving an overview of the transportation and transit initiatives that are part of the project itself. The transit initiatives are being viewed as phase 2 of the project. Phase 2 of the project is not scheduled to begin until 2025, or after the completion of the modernization of the I-90 viaduct itself. The phase 2 work consists of layover tracks, layover facilities, and layover provisions, and then ultimately the West Station, or the construction of West Station itself. The area in which we are looking to, and we're discussing today, this redevelopment and the construction of this project, is an area that we refer to as Beacon Park Yards. Beacon Park Yards is a former site of a CSX rail yard, but it is now currently owned by Harvard University. The MBTA and MassDOT have easement rights to utilize property at Beacon Park Yards for both use of the Worcester Main Line, the Grand Junction Line, as well as layover tracks. We now are working through a letter, well, we have a letter of intent, excuse me, with Harvard that also lays out the details for the relocation of the I-90 viaduct. It discusses in more detail the layover provisions and layover facilities, and also discusses the development of the West Station. We are working towards a definitive agreement with Harvard that is expected that would be completed after we go through all of the environmental and MEPA process itself.
So Jeff, if I could ask you to pause, because both board members have asked about air rights, so I just really want to be clear on the ownership. Harvard owns the land. So this is not a case where we own the land and we're negotiating air rights for Harvard. This is actually a case where Harvard owns the land, and what we're negotiating is enough property rights to be able to do the transit projects. The air rights will continue to belong to Harvard under the structure that was created in the 2014 letter of intent, and there's a sort of specific height that the project will need to fit underneath, because above that height, it is Harvard's.
Okay, just a question related to that, because thank you for the clarification. This is really helpful, because I was going to ask that if in the planning to date that we had thought about where foundations for air rights might sit and when best to install them and how to minimize future disruption of the stations to be able to accommodate those air rights. But I would imagine that those are inputs that we need from Harvard University if they own the air rights, and the question is, have we had them to a definitive level that we can assure ourselves that, I think sort of from a public realm perspective, we like to encourage joint development, but certainly from a protection of the asset, to make sure that future air rights development doesn't end up denigrating the customer experience in and around the station. So how would we characterize Harvard's input to all of that at this point?
So if we could, Mr. Chairman, can we table that question, because it's a very good question.
You certainly may.
And I'll probably turn it over to Mike at the end of this to give more detailed answers, because I think,
sure,
as you're aware, there are several alignments that are still under review at the moment, and I think each one of those alignments would have a varying answer on where those foundations, where those support pillars would be for those air rights. So I'd probably turn it over to Mike after we go through this, and I promise I'll keep it brief, Mr. Chairman, as we go through, and then, because I imagine there'll be a number of other questions as well that may come from that.
Yeah, and the other thing I would just say is, The environmental review process creates a little bit of a chicken and an egg. We actually cannot finalize a land use agreement with them without violating MIPA. So we talk about what we think the final land use agreement will look like with Harvard, and have been since before I was secretary, but were we to actually reach a definitive agreement with Harvard before we received our final certificate under MIPA, we would actually be violating MIPA, which prohibits final agency action until after you've gone through the process. So it's a chicken and an egg problem that we need to work through, which is we need to talk to them enough to understand so that we can plan the project, but we actually need to have another final EIR and another round of public review before we can lock it down.
Madam Secretary?
Mr. Mayor.
If I could, just a quick clarifying question for my understanding. So the air rights that we're giving to Harvard?
Nope. Harvard owns all the land. The air rights that Harvard is retaining as they give us the land underneath. That's what makes this unique.
So Harvard, as the property owner, retains air rights. Correct. And they would be under any type of redevelopment of that area would be under the oversight and the monitoring of the city of Cambridge?
City of Boston. We're on the Boston side of the river.
Okay,
yeah.
So do we give up all of our, let me ask the question a different way. How many cities and towns, and I understand Harvard owns the yard, but where have we done this in terms of air rights for either a private developer or for a municipality? I'm aware of Quincy by statutory right back in many, many years ago, and I'm going to say the 60s or 70s, retained air rights in terms of the Red Line extension. Yep. Our town of Braintree at that time achieved that result. But I'm curious as to what other, either municipality or private landowner has air right capability that we allow them to have.
So again, we don't own the land, so we don't give up air rights when we own it.
I understand that. I appreciate that. But we're paying for this transit development, correct? I mean, I know Harvard's going to be a contributor. I'm just curious as to, have we done this before? Are we setting some type of precedent?
So certainly during my time, nothing that I'm aware of, and my time being, the last 17, 15 years here at the MBTA. I mean, I don't know.
So in 17 years, we've never done this before?
Well, again, we don't usually build on other people's land. We usually buy the land. And then when you buy the land, or you take the land by eminent domain, then you have all the rights to the land, and then you decide how you use it. In this case, to be perfectly honest with you, we are trying to come up with what we've called a value for value swap. We could take the land from Harvard for its value, which would be pretty expensive and would include all the future value of the air rights. That is a possibility, I suppose, if we did not reach agreement with Harvard. Our goal is to reach an agreement where the value of the land we get and the value of the air rights they get are roughly even, so that no money changes hands. The price tags that you have seen for this project actually assume no money changes hands for the land. If their money did have to change hands, that would increase the cost of the project. So there is no precedent, but it's also true that in general, we either own the land or we simply buy or take the land. In this case, the premise of the 2014 letter of intent is that the property ownership deal would keep the partial ownership. We'd have the right to build underneath, and Harvard would simply not transfer to us the air rights. So we're not giving away air rights, we're just not acquiring air rights.
Do we get any development rights at all in terms of the station and some of the, adjacent property, or is it all Harvard?
Under the 2014 letter of intent, all of the air rights development remains Harvard's. We did not negotiate for any development rights.
So I did want to spend some time on this particular slide from more of an operational standpoint to talk about what one of our greatest needs is today, and certainly be a much larger need in the future. And that's layover and layover facilities. Currently, right now, we have six train car sets during the off-peak that have no layover space. So what that means is that there is no place for us to be able to park these train sets during the midday when they're not needed during the peaks. So there is a shuffling that goes on every single weekday between Reedville, Southampton Street Yard, and then operationally putting these train sets, or these extra 6 train sets, into positions where they will be ready for PM service out of South Station in the afternoon rush. The Beacon Park's yard itself is something that has been analyzed and looked at several times for various different studies, including the South Station expansion project. And one thing that has been overwhelmingly clear through all of these policy and long-term planning documents or studies that have been done is that critical for any expansion of the commuter rail network is going to be stations or spots for layover. That's both overnight storage and storage for midday off-peak. And the Beacon Park's yard has been identified as an area that is ideal for this. And that is essentially because, one, it is about 3.8 track miles from Beacon Park's yard to South Station. It also has close access by use of the Grand Junction Bridge over the Charles River to the Boston Engine Terminal, which is where we conduct all of our major overhaul, major work, major repairs on the train sets themselves. And then in addition to that, it is close proximity to Cambridge, Kendall, and even North Station. So if there was, and there's been a lot of discussions about future expansion of commuter rail, we would obviously want to have the lane oversight that would be close to those areas in Cambridge and to the Kendall area itself. The project itself is planned that we would begin constructing these layover sites in 2025 after, again, the completion of the viaduct work on I-90. This includes the construction of 4 tracks that would be layover tracks that would allow us to lay over 8 train sets. In addition to that, the plan is to also, or at least the hopeful plan, is to complete 4 additional tracks that would eventually become the mainline use or use for the West Station, but would, in the short term, give us the ability to store 16 train sets. This phase 2 work will also include layover provisions, which means that we would have compressed air, water, and electricity that allows us to essentially supplement what the locomotive would be doing to provide energy to the train sets that would allow us to not have to idle the locomotives. In addition to that, a light maintenance facility is included as part of this proposal, and that light maintenance facility is just that. It is an area where we can clean coaches. It's going to be an area where we can replace brake pads or shoes or any type of minor repairs to these vehicles or train sets. Included in that as well would be mechanical daily inspections that are FRA required before any train set goes into revenue service. We're also hopeful that we will have the ability to have a wheel truing machine, which will give us the ability to round out our wheels using a lathe. And to the control board members, I'm sure that you recall that we've had coach shortages in the past due to not having enough availability at times for wheel truing. So this would offer us a greater level of mechanical flexibility to scheduling that type of work.
I think the chairman has a question before you.
Just a couple of questions, and they're all somewhat related, so you may want to sort of come back at a separate time. With respect to this facility, the need for this facility, this is, I think, one of a couple of facilities. The other one was Widette Circle that was in the South Station master plan as well. If we get Widette, do we need this as well? That's sort of one set of questions. There has also been, I remember the Transit Matters people had talked about converting to electrified service on the Attleboro line, and perhaps using a facility down in Rhode Island for the maintenance of that equipment and probably storage of that equipment. And if that were to happen, does that lessen the requirement for this facility or with that facility? And then the third thing that I am just trying to understand is, well, there's 2 more. The third thing I'm trying to understand is we've got this ongoing study about the current commuter rail system, whether or not it needs to be a regional rail system. And if we begin to convert, let's say, Worcester into an all-day service with more frequent headways, does this notion of midday layover as we go from a commuter type system to an all-day system, does that sort of lessen it or increase it, or what does it do with respect to requirement here? And then the last question is, there was some talk with some of the advocates, and I just don't know the track layout here, some concern over a single track commuter rail period during the height of the construction. Does the placement of the commuter rail layover exacerbate that? Is it independent of that? How does that all factor in? So it's a whole series of integrated questions. We don't have a lot of time because I know Director Schotzleave is going to has to leave at 3. So maybe that could be a technical analysis that you come back with on.
So we can probably answer some of those today.
Yeah, I just don't want to get into a prolonged discussion because we've got to do water and take a vote before 3 o'clock. So.
All right, so I'll keep moving through the presentation. I think we've all taken notes on those questions, and we can, if we have time at the end, we can come back to that. If not, we can come back to you, Mr. Chairman, on those answers. But some of them I do believe we have answers for. Just quickly, the West Station would be along the Worcester line. I think it's very clear to everyone about the Worcester line. It was one of our worst performing lines. It's the second heaviest traveled line that we have. It is now one of our better performing lines and has about a 90% availability. One of the things that I did want to point out from an operational practical standpoint is that the planning team has estimated that a new station would add about 3 minutes worth of travel time to the line itself. That certainly, from a theoretical standpoint, makes sense, but just having a good understanding of the variations between vehicle accelerations, vehicle braking, and passenger dwell time, that 3 minutes could easily be increased above and beyond that. Also, we've servicing the Alston area. I think that the board is very much aware. In 2014, we opened up Yawkey Station, and in 2017, we then opened up the Boston Landing Station in the Alston area as well. If you look at the alignment for West Station, it is now about 0.8 miles from station platform to station platform between West Station to Boston Landing. That is 5 train car lengths or 5 train set lengths between Boston Landing to the proposed West Station. The West Station itself proposal right now is and has 3 platforms that would be constructed. 2 would serve inbound, outbound Worcester Main Line tracks. The 3rd platform would be utilized to service the Grand Junction. The thought there is that that would give us the ability for future expansion of the line itself. Moving forward, there is also, as I said, this is a multimodal facility. The multimodal facility itself is going to consist of 5 bus berths that will allow us to board and alight bus passengers. There will be 5 bus layover facilities that will be there as well. A passenger pickup and drop-off area that could be utilized by TNCs, taxis, and or other forms of private carriers that would be able to utilize the area. In addition to that, we are going to have multimodal access for both walking and bicycles to access the station, and there's estimated to be about 50 bike storage units that will be as part of this particular station itself. The station today, if you envision where West Station is, there really are 3 bus lines that run the closest to what would be the Alston Station, the Route 57, 64, and Route 66. The Route 57 and 66 are part of our 2 of our key bus routes. The Route 57 itself is our 8th heaviest traveled bus route, where we have about 10,500 boardings per day. And the Route 66 is our 2nd highest bus route from a ridership standpoint, where we have over 12,000 boardings per day. The reason why I mention that is because that right now we do not and cannot certainly project at this point in time what variations we would make to these routes to be able to accommodate West Station, which would be opened in somewhere around the estimated of a 2040 time frame. We would certainly want to analyze this and take a look at what is occurring, and we would not want it to be detrimental to our existing passengers and our existing customers themselves right now as it is. Mike and the team are working on preparing a final environmental impact report. Getting back to the previous slide, their team of VHB right now is interviewing and conducting a survey out at Boston Landing that will be looking at customers that are utilizing the Boston Landing stop and looking at and interviewing them from a standpoint on what transportation options that they have. In addition to that, we are also be able, through that process, get a good, accurate passenger counts of how many of our customers today are utilizing Boston Landing. In addition to that, MassDOT and the City of Boston are partnering with CTPS to conduct a more near-term study to look at some of the gaps that we have of bus service that is servicing the Alston area today. It's important to note that they're going to be working very closely with Jess Casey and our Better Bus team and working somewhat collaboratively to make sure that any information is gained through that 6-month study that's going to be happening there would be fed back into our Better Bus program as well. And lastly, more long-term vision, MassDOT, so Dave and the team are going to be working with the MAPC and an MAPC-led study that would have a more long-term vision of what the transportation network would really look like and to help drive what decisions and what bus service may or may not look like at West Station in the 2014 timeframe. So I think I'll stop there, Mr. Chairman. I tried to somewhat move it along.
I'll defer to other board members as well, but let me shoot a couple of things I'd like to see in the next presentation. I cannot tell from this drawing sort of where buses are coming from and going to, so it would be good to sort of zoom out and be clear about buses going sort of north, south, where they're coming from, where they're going to. I'd like to see also other vehicle and servicing maneuverability through here. This is a pretty complicated station. I'd like to see architectural drawings to understand how passengers move through the facility, up and down and to the neighborhood, from the neighborhood, walking paths, etc. I'd like to see, for each of the options, understand this Grand Junction move and how the Grand Junction works under any of these scenarios, and sort of try to understand what that looks like and feels like. And I would want to try to understand whether we got enough capacity here to accommodate sort of two types of, you did mention private enterprises, which I was glad to hear the TNCs, but beyond that, we've got in this area a whole series of private bus shuttles run by variously BU, Masco, Harvard, and also whether or not, as an example, the Peter Pan bus line coming in from Springfield on the way to South Station, is this a sensible place if we're going to have 8 million square feet or whatever NBU there? Does it make sense for this to be a stop off and then back on the pike? Are those movements anticipated? Does it make sense? Is there enough room? I'm not suggesting that any of these need to happen. I just want to get a sensitivity analysis and a study of them. Does this facility need to be a little bit bigger? Do we need to push back at Harvard for more air rights to be able to creep over the highway? I don't know, but that would be on my list. I'll stop there, and other board members may have questions.
So if I might, one thing I would just sort of emphasize on this slide is that there's a distinction between the final environmental impact report for a multimodal center and service planning. This is not a service planning exercise. We have no idea what service will be in 2040. Right now, the service we run is the Framingham line and the bus routes that Jeff showed you. That's it. So we can talk about all those things, but the reason for trying to start the studies that are mentioned in the third and fourth bullets is because having service planning happening at the same time would then make it easier to do the design work, but we cannot do that service planning without partners because right now you have none of those services in your budget. There is no Grand Junction passenger service, nor is there any planned, nor is there any pilot planned. There are no other bus routes other than the 6, none of which currently stop at West Station. So the first study is to really look at the short term. What are the services we might want to do in transit in the short term, because the issue has been raised of an interim station, which there is no sense building if there's not going to be service. So we need to answer the service question before we can answer the interim station question. And the second one is to look at the longer term so that we make sure that we build the station in the way that would be required to accommodate all the service that people would want. But I think part of the what we've heard from the public is sort of let's do service planning as part of this exercise. And it's a multimodal capital exercise, and it's not really possible to do service planning at the same time as it is to do this project, especially given that almost all of the services that people are asking for don't currently exist and serve trips that don't currently exist. So that makes it tough. So what we're trying to do is not punt and not say that the questions are the wrong questions, but we're trying to say they belong in MBTA-led service planning exercises, because ultimately the T will have to decide if they're going to run those services.
Madam Secretary?
Yep.
Thank you. I appreciate the explanation. I appreciate this is a very complicated issue, and we're trying to get to a positive result here. But some of the conversations that we've heard publicly is that there's really a sensitivity to trying to have the station established prior to the layover facility. So is this EIR that we're going to go about now still calls for the station to be built in 2040?
So it's my understanding that that's the case, correct?
Okay.
Yes.
The draft did, the final won't be out. But again, I just have to say this out of a sense of fairness. Everyone wants service and no one wants layover. We have not let any
I'm
other...
not saying
No, but just let me finish. Every other community that has asked for service, we have required layover.
Right.
Fall River and New Bedford, we are building layover with Phase 1 of South Coast Rail, and they were told if they don't let us build layover, they don't get it. Foxborough was told if they ever want the pilot service to be complete, they need to have layover. The Worcester line was built with insufficient layover. It doesn't have enough layover today, let alone in the future. I understand why the community wants the station first. The T wants layover first. It actually has layover in its 5-year capital budget. It doesn't have service.
As a community that I view as the start of the red line, not the end of the red line, we have a layover facility in Braintree. And that gets utilized in the evening, particularly late at night, and when we're trying to keep the trains running in the wintertime, and it butts a neighborhood. So I appreciate the fact that layover facilities are a requirement operationally. I guess my question is, in the conversations we've been having, trying to see if we could prioritize the platform and the station, recognizing that a layover facility needs to be built as well. I'd like to see us look at it that way from a prioritization standpoint as opposed to looking at a 2040 a station. I mean, I think the station being built will bring the level of transit access and ridership that we're looking for. And I just want to understand how we're looking at these air rights. And I know that I'm simplifying this, and I don't mean to do that because I know it's extremely complicated. And Jeff, I want to thank you and your team for the work you've done. And I know it's, you know, a tremendous amount of thought has gone into this. But we're bringing a public transit operation to West Station, to an area that needs attention. We're going to get a layover for it. That will bring some value to us. But in paying public dollars and then allowing the private landowner to receive all the benefits associated with air rights and development, I'm just kind of questioning that equation. I don't mean to do it badly or in a way that's critical. I'm just trying to understand an explanation on why we would do that. Why would we bring so much public investment to an area that doesn't have it? Yes, we get a layover facility. But what is the value we get after that? Operationally, we get a value, but we don't get the revenue streams. That's a huge multiplier that's going to be existing for the Alston area, the Harvard University, for everyone, for generations to come. And I don't know, is part of the agreement, do they help us maintain the facility, the commuter rail? Do they help us do some work on the layover facility? I don't know what the economic benefit that they receive. Are they putting money back into the station and the layover facility? So
I think
if you talk about value, that's great value for Harvard University. It's good value for us, but it's great value for them.
I think you raised some very good points, Mayor, and I think that right now the letter of intent goes back to 2014, correct? Right. And the team is still in negotiations and discussions with Harvard, so I think that those are very, very valid points, sir.
So was the letter of 14 done under the current administration? No. Okay. So isn't there an opportunity to revisit this issue? I mean, if we're serious about West Station and getting that in place, wouldn't we be looking at a way in which we would approach it differently? I mean, we're now beholden, I guess is the term I'd use, to a 2014 agreement that we didn't sign. And a lot has happened in the last 4 years.
So honestly, again, Director, I think you're raising some very valid points.
Okay. Thank you.
Madam Secretary. Clearly, this is a complicated project, and there are a lot of moving parts. But I think I would just like to make one comment as I look through the presentation here, and that comment is relative to the Boston-Worcester line and its importance to everyone who travels that line, and particularly given its performance metrics of late, I think it's critical that, again, there's a lot of asks in here and everybody wants their own thing. Well, one of the things that I would be looking closely at is making sure that both in the short term and in the long term, there's no further degradation to the operation of that line. And in the opposite, I would hope that with this opportunity, we're going to be able to improve service and include increasing ridership along that very important line. Clearly, the travel times right now are marginal at best. It would be wonderful if we could improve on those travel times. And so I would simply ask you to keep that in your thinking and in the planning, that as we move forward, that we look at this as an opportunity to improve along that line. Thank you.
Madam Secretary, very quick question, and I know Director Shortsleeve has to leave. So one of the public speakers earlier said that the task force meetings have not been taking place on this topic. So I just have 3 questions. 1, do we facilitate those? 2, have they been happening? And 3, if not, is there a future meeting planned, or are they going to do something going forward?
That's a good question. Mike, do you have?
Yeah, we will be reinstituting, Director. We need to reach out to some of the users and facilities on I-90 further west. We received a lot of comments during the public process of the DEIR. The members, Dave, Framingham, Worcester, a lot of the public that utilize vehicular use I-90 weren't consulted with prior to the filing of the DEIR. So we're going to reach out there first and then start implementing and instituting the task force members as well. Thank you.
Just one last comment, Jeff. I'd like my request to remain in place, and the point I'm trying to make, I know we can't do service planning for whether it's 2025 or 2030 or 2040, that those things will take place, but given the complexity and the tightness of this site, we need to understand the sensitivity analysis of the footprint and program possibilities for this site, so that if it turns out in the future, oh my goodness, this really ends up being the central transportation enterprise for Harvard, MIT, the Masco community, the Alston-Brighton, the 7 million square feet, et cetera. We want to make sure we have enough footprint. So I think it would be important from a structural perspective and from a circulation perspective, circulation of every element, to do a sensitivity analysis about whether or not this thing can be expanded if needed to in the future, and under which of the alignments that you're examining do we have the best ability to preserve things downstream. And that includes also the Grand Junction route as well. So I'd like to understand that. I know we can't predict it, but it might be comfortable to know that under option 1, that gives us more expandable opportunities, or station expansion opportunities, if 20, 30 years from now we're deciding that this place needs to accommodate a whole bunch more service. So if you could do that sensitivity analysis, that would be helpful. Thanks.
Just to add a little additional specificity on to Chairman Aiello's comment, both in the physical nature of the what eventually is the preferred alternative, and in the negotiation of air rights, I personally would like to see opportunity not foreclosed on for bus connections north to south. So I just add that to the list. If you look at your bus map, it further calls into attention the need for that north-south connection, more direct. I think it's needed today. I think it's going to be amplified in the future numbers, but I don't see any plans that consider the compatibility of the current alternatives for north-south bus moves.
So obviously this will continue to be a continuing discussion. Again, I would simply encourage board members to keep in mind that This is part of a multimodal project that includes a structurally deficient viaduct, and it may simply not be possible to answer all the questions that everyone wants on the transit side in the time frame that we need to do. So we're committed, as both MassDOT and the T, to continue the short-term service planning process, the longer-term service planning process, the commuter rail vision process, and I completely agree with the chairman. We need to leave enough room for West Station to occupy the space it needs to. The other thing that I would just say and remind both boards is, as was pointed out at Capital Programs Committee, we don't yet have a finance plan for this multimodal project. We are putting together a joint board staff committee to work on developing that finance plan. The financial source for the road side of the project, which is tolls, cannot be used off of the tolled facilities, which means that unless someone else, the T or MassDOT or the city or Harvard steps up, and Harvard has on pieces of this but not on others, it will need to be programmed. And right now, what is programmed in the near-term capital plan for the T is the beginning of the work towards the layover because of the T's current need for layover. The station is not currently programmed in either capital plan for the next 5 years. So we need to just keep in mind, as people think about it, we also have to think about what the different sources are to pay for all the different elements, bicycle and pedestrian elements, commuter rail layover, transit service, and the roads as well.